Hello, Amanda. Welcome to this conversation with Media for Growth. Thank you so much for taking your time off to talk to us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
Amanda, we have connected before on the theme of OH, and you gave a brilliant interview to Outdo Asia. I would like to follow up on the conversations that have happened since then, and more particularly since the world is fairly recovered from the pandemic and businesses are pretty much back on track. How do you see this OH business shaping up from here? Is it going to be more of the same, or do you see any new patterns emerging?
I definitely see new patterns emerging. I think even in some of the revenue projections that we're seeing internationally, nationally, we're seeing a shift into more of a digitally centric environment with digital out of home and programmatic digital out of home. Notwithstanding, static is still the majority of the revenue here within the Canadian marketplace, but we will see a bit of a leveling out of that. Whereas traditional media used to, take 80-75% of overall ad spends, we're going to see that shift a little bit, and it's going to become more even between traditional as well as digital out of home. I also think that from a consumer movement perspective, particularly in the Canadian space, which is where we're entered, but I'm certain it's like this elsewhere. Particularly considering Canada has had some of the most restrictive rules globally during the pandemic. So I'm pleased to see that our stats are recovering, consumer movements are back on track. We recently did a study with one of our partners, BrandSpark, where we created a survey to understand the patterns of movement, general consumers, and the recall and efficacy of out of home post pandemic. And we saw some really powerful numbers. There was about 75% of the Canadians were active outside of their homes. And this study was just conducted at the end of September, and we were looking at the prior 30 days. So it would have been sort of summer recap movement. So 75% of consumers surveyed were outside of their homes. And a really powerful number was that 78% of those respondents actually noticed and recalled seeing out of home advertisements. So it's indicative that there's a bit of digital tiredness where everybody wants to sort of get away from their screens and certainly be back in the office. We're seeing a resurgence effective September 1st, sort of right after the Labor Day long weekend here in Canada, when all the kids went back to school. There was a lot of major financial institutions and large consulting firms that instituted a minimum of 3 days a week back in the office, and some are 4 days a week back in the office. So as you can see, I live right downtown Toronto, and I can leave my condo building, and it is very busy. So I think that post-pandemic, we're going to thrive, and I think we're going to exceed very quickly the prior benchmark that was set in 2019, and we're going to see a new benchmark of 2022.
Oh, that's fabulous to know. And I think this should be the trend that markets across the globe will also see. Amanda, you are heading an industry body, and there would be many things that you'll be looking at an industry level. Do you see any change in approach that media owning firms would have toward this business here on?
Certainly, I think there's a lot of optimization strategies happening, particularly within the media owners' real estate departments. The real estate departments here in the North American space would be classified as those building the structures of out-of-home assets. So there's certainly a lot of assessment and understanding of performance based on a face level versus just at a market level to really optimize specific inventory types, as well as to find areas of which that perhaps some underperforming assets could be cannibalized and traded up from a government relations perspective into a digital component, which has a bit more flexibility and could play into the trend of the digital growth side of things. I do also see that from a media owner perspective, the fact that consumers are out and about again is really driving creative ways for sales strategies and sales tactics. So in Canada in particular, we as COMMB are heavily focused on perception studies. So understanding the perception of the buyers, so the major sort of holding codes from an agency parent company, and what is their perception of consumer movement in comparison to the general consumer population of Canada? So we've recently done another study that was exactly that. We've not yet published the results, but the results were quite astounding, in the sense of a difference of perceived notion on the buy side versus the general consumer population, which is something that is a huge opportunity for the media owners, because we can leverage this true understanding of what it is that could be a challenge in the sense of a buyer's adoption of out of home. I also think from a media owner perspective, standardization and data is key. So we do a lot of data science within our organization and create the currency by which the industry transacts upon. But I think that there's opportunity for standardization and more sort of interaction with MMM plans, so multimedia mixes. I do think that there's quite a bit of opportunity there from a media owner perspective, and I think that would make the format easier to understand and easier to gauge against some of the other formats that we're so complementary to. We're not here to compete with them. We are very much complementary to other media formats. And it's really about providing a statistic and a measurement that showcases that message.
Very interesting. In fact, you mentioned two aspects. One, of course, is the digital fatigue that people experience in the time of pandemic. And of course, you also have made an observation about how OH can actually work in tandem with other media channels. Now, that said, what is the percentage of OH, what's the percentage share of OH in the overall ad spends in Canada?
It's small in comparison to the overall ad spends. I was trying to recall digital out of home versus static out of home, which is why I paused there. In Canada, out of home in general, as a whole, combination of traditional as well as digital, depending on the year, trends around 6-8% of total overall ad spends. And that's something that I think is a trend globally. I don't think that we are dissimilar to any other country. Right. However, it's a message that I think perhaps we need to take a different approach on. And it's my approach is we're not competing to take dollars away.
Yes.
We're competing to ensure that the client and the brand has the most successful and effective campaign and sees an ROI. And in order to do that, again, I think that standardization and the reporting, the statistics, the data behind it is going to become even more front and center. And organically, by providing attribution and measurement that is complementary to other media formats, which are more streamlined, I would say, in the way that they can measure their one-to-one versus a one-to-many. It's a very different approach. However, if we can adopt various different language that has complementary factors to other media formats, I think that organically out of home will grow that piece of the ad share or the overall ad spend. And I think that we need to do a really strong job from a marketing perspective to be able to push that narrative. Oftentimes the out of home industry is quite shy and we're quite reserved in the sense of like, well, we're a traditional media format. We are not. We have traditional elements to it, but we're very much a digital media format. Whether you're running a static campaign or a digital campaign, data is driving all of the components behind it, whether it is a super board, a poster, a transit wrap, or if it's a digital out of home serving up programmatic ads. Data is fueling all of these media formats. And at the end of the day, we are evolving from a traditional media format to something that is very much digitally centric and data driven.
Absolutely. Amanda, what is the percentage of DOH in the overall OH business in Canada?
It's small. I don't recall the exact percentage off the top of my head, but we had these numbers the other day, and COMMB measures in the outdoor side of things. We have approximately 60,000 out-of-home assets, and about 4,000 of them are digital. So mental math, we can do that if you like. But on the place-based side, which is the indoor side, there's about 17,000 screens, and about 5,000 of them are digital.
All right.
So it's somewhat small in comparison. However, that does continue to grow. We've seen sort of this curve of a trend in sort of adoption of digital and cannibalization of some of those underperforming traditional assets to more digital. And the bulk of the new inventory that is being installed and quoted on, so COMMB also provides what we call circulation or impression estimates for our members if they're looking to build in specific areas, because we've got data for every single road across Canada. It's about 6.7 million plus road segments. And so we provide estimates so that they can understand exactly what the potential impression impact would be and what the volume component would be. So we're seeing a significant trend in that request line, if you will, that's predominantly digital.
Right. With increasing digitalization, are you seeing the ad spends also increase commensurate? Take the UK market as an example.
I mean, the UK is always quite advanced with respect to its digital adoption. And so certainly the case here in Canada as well, we are seeing ad spend shift. And I sort of touched on that previously, where we're going to see a bit of a leveling out. So historically through 2016, 2017, 2018, we were seeing a split of ad spend, let's call it 70% in the traditional side of things and 30% in the digital. But that's actually, particularly post-pandemic, there was a shift in 2020 where it was almost 50-50 traditional and digital, obviously during the onset of core pandemic lockdowns. But moving into 2021, that sort of flipped where it was 60% digital and sort of 40% traditional. And I think from a projection perspective, what we're seeing based on some data from Statista and eMarketer, we're seeing a bit of a trend where it's going to sort of level out and sort of stay flat from a split perspective between 2023 through to 2027, where it's almost 60-40 of digital and more traditional advertising. So I think that certainly the advertisers and the buyers appreciate the flexibility with the digital side of things. However, I think that the awareness and the impact of, particularly large format digital and the reach that, more traditional posters, et cetera, have from a GRP perspective is not going to go away. It's always going to be of value. It depends on the KPIs of the buy side. And I think we're going to see more trends in the sense of strategy is going to become more and more important on the buy side, so that they're evaluating exactly the media formats that are available to them, but really creating compelling strategies to say, okay, if my client is looking for reach, I'm probably going to do, a classic buy with leveraging my GRPs, but maybe their secondary KPI is audience segmentation. And perhaps I need to layer in some programmatic digital out of home within that holistic strategy. I think we're going to see more of a combined strategy, and it's not going to be so fragmented.
Fantastic, Amanda. Now we are increasingly moving to an era of integrated communications, and omnichannel marketing is much talked about in all the conferences. Do you see DOH locating itself well in this particular space of omnichannel marketing?
I do. I absolutely do. And we've actually had some recent conversations with some of our key buying members, and some of them are moving digital out of home out of the out of home budget and moving it into digital budget, which I think is fantastic because that's going to ultimately increase the overall ad spend for the medium, not just digital out of home, but out of home in general. And I think that is going to become an increasing trend where it is a digital brand. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a computer. It's just a computer that's much larger and on the side of a very large, busy road, particularly, or in a really condensed urban core. So we have to look at these products very uniquely because they are all unique, and the value that they provide is different based on, again, certain strategies. Digital, I do see in the long term, definitely taking a stronger stance in the omni-channel space. And we've seen it with some of the programmatic tech stacks doing major deals with Yahoo and Google, and the recent announcements that have come out with the programmatic players in the space. And it's only going to continue to happen, and it's going to increase. And I could see, some of the big major tech players, the Apples, the Googles of the world, just entering into the digital out of home space very aggressively, because it is it's very complementary, and it does not sway far out of their current programmatic ethos.
Indeed, absolutely exciting it is, and the future looks very, very interesting for this medium. Amanda, my final question, really, and we are having this conversation continents away, but for long we thought, oh, it is a hyperlocal medium, and its addressable markets are within a very close proximity. But with digital out of home in place and with networked media, my sense is that this is the age of globalization of this medium. But what are your thoughts on that?
I agree 100%. If there's anything we've seen with the adoption of digital out of home, is that programmatic digital out of home in particular has broken down those barriers. I can purchase in any continent leveraging a programmatic DSP, and in addition, the collaboration has come through tenfold. We're now speaking continents away, as you've said, about these similar topics, and we have organizations like the World Out of Home, which does a great job at facilitating some of these conversations. And they did do I can't remember what the date of this campaign that they launched. I think perhaps it was in 2020, but they did a global digital out of home campaign, and I think it was called Our Second Chance.
Yes.
Which was really a powerful campaign, and highlighted the fact that the global industry and the global sector of digital out of home in particular are willing to collaborate. And so if we evaluate sort of the work that Woo is doing to bring in global standardization, global guidelines, if you will, certainly it's hard to standardize, I would say, across continents. However, creating guidelines and structures is something that's highly advantageous. And I know a lot of the founders of the major tech stacks that are working multinationally, and their integrations and their strategies from a growth perspective, they're not looking, local, regional. Everything is very large scale. It's a big vision to conquer the world, if you will, but in a way that provides value and does offer a complementary media format to some of those other applications. So I definitely see that there is a huge global opportunity with respect to digital out of home, as well as just out of home in general. Again, the data that we're using to power digital out of home is being leveraged in the classic side. We're using the same insights and the same data. This has a different application of campaign activation. So I think that there's opportunity in both the digital out of home side, but also in the traditional side, to have some sort of global impact.
Great to hear that, Amanda. Well, let's hope that there will be more cross-flow of investments and forging of cross-border partnerships. All of this, I'm sure we will get to see on the global OH or DOH landscape. So, Amanda, thank you so much for your views, observations, and most valuable, and our audience are going to love it. And
thank you.
I'm really hoping that we will also have the opportunity to have you as a speaker at our conference next year. When we do that, I will also reach out to you, and I think we would love to have you over as a speaker at our conference, Amanda.
I would love to. Absolutely love to. Count me in.